Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, in the US, are black women being left out of the conversation on police brutality? We're going to look at police abuses against them and what's being done to stop it. So, offline, we may not be talking enough about black women and police brutality. Online, it's a very rich conversation. Malika Blouse, our digital producer, you're right in the thick of it. What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's a great way to describe it, Femi. There's so much online about this, and a lot of people are really angry, and they're looking for a way to channel that anger. And so this is one way. This is Feminist True. This is how she's channeling it on Twitter. She writes, "If I made T-shirts like this, would you guys buy them to spread awareness?" And you can see two women of color walking with "Don't Shoot" signs on their back. So we want you to join in on this conversation with your own ideas, your questions, using hashtag AJStream. But first, here are a few other hashtags related to this story that you should follow.
Conversations about police brutality in the US are happening more often, but many activists say the experiences of African American women are largely missing. Less heard of are cases like those of Rekia Boyd, Tanisha Anderson and Yvette Smith, all unarmed black women killed by the police. This month, the apparent suicide of 28-year-old Sandra Bland has outraged the US public and have many questioning the treatment of African American women by law enforcement. Now, Bland was stopped for a traffic violation and later found dead in her cell 3 days later. Online, the hashtag Say Her Name is bringing awareness to these cases. So today, what we'd like to do is know more about how African American women have experienced police violence. With us to talk about this in Los Angeles, Kimberly Crenshaw, a professor at Columbia Law School and the University of California, Los Angeles. She's also the director of the African American Policy Forum, which tracks police abuses against black women in the US. In Chicago, Martinez Sutton, his sister Rekia Boyd, was killed in a police shooting that was back in 2012. He's also an activist with the group Women's All Point Bulletin. And in Mountain View, California, Ladoris Hazard Cordell, she's a former judge and independent law enforcement auditor in San Jose, where she oversaw police misconduct cases. So guests, welcome. It's good to have you in this conversation. Malika, I mentioned this conversation online being really, really busy. So busy, in fact, we've put together a heat map. Tell us about that.
Well, you mentioned the name Sandra Bland, and that name, quite interestingly, has lit up around the world. You can see it here on this heat map that you mentioned. This is the use of the hashtag Sandra Bland. It's been used more than 1.3 million times since she died on July 13th. And that story really caught on fire. You can see how far it spread, particularly around July 22nd. It really literally went across the world. So you see this, Kimberly, and you have to wonder, what was it about this case, about Sandra Bland's case, that made it blow up like this?
Yes, and first of all, I'm just I'm taken by how quickly it did blow up, and I've been thinking about that as well. So I think a couple of things. I think first of all, there had been a sort of a conversation that already had started around Say Her Name, with many activists pointing out that black women too are killed by the police, and we just don't hold up their stories, we don't hold up their names, we don't know much about the circumstance. So I think there was already, you know, a kind of conceptual infrastructure that was being built over the last 6 months around the issue. And then when Sandra Bland ended up being pulled over by police and expressed what many of us know to be our rights, and reflected what many of us probably felt was happening, that she was being profiled, and that her response, basically asserting her right to continue to smoke her cigarette in her car prompted a tremendous coercive response. A taser is it can be life-threatening. It's incredibly painful. So the threat of a life-threatening response, the throwing her on the ground, all of that seemed to resonate because we were able to see it, we were able to identify with it. Many of us have been in precisely that circumstance, and you add to that the final point, she was an activist. She was talking about precisely these issues, that someone who was talking about these issues, an activist in this issue, someone who was going to her alma mater to help other people, would wind up ultimately killed. That, I think, really just captured everybody's fear and anger, and that's why the hashtag has spread as widely as it has.
Judge, I'm just going to play a little clip of the dashboard camera that the police released. It's just a little clip, and then I'm going to ask you about how you connect with Sandra Bland. Have a look at this. This is the dashboard camera.
Hello, ma'am. With the Texas Highway Patrol, the reason for your stop is you failed to signal your lane change. You got your driver's license insurance with you? You mind putting out your cigarette, please? Don't mind.
I'm in my car, but I have to put out my cigarette.
Well, you can step on out now. Get out of the car now, or I'm going to remove you.
And I'm calling my
I'm going to yank you out of here.
Okay, you going to yank me out of my car?
I will light you up. Get out!
Wow.
Now!
Wow.
Get out of the car!
Really?
Judge, there's so many ways you could relate to this story from your personal circumstances. Which one do you want to share with us?
Well, first of all, let me just say that I'm so glad you're focusing on the issue of black women in dealing with the police. It was black women who even came up with the hashtag Black Lives Matter. So we've always been central to the social justice movement and also to the battle for equal rights. In police academies, they're taught there's no such thing as a routine traffic stop. And they're taught that because they're told, well, someone in the car could have a gun, it could be your last day. But the same is true, especially of African Americans in this country. There is no such thing for black people as a routine traffic stop. And the Sandra Bland case points that up. I've had my own experience. Now, I went to Stanford Law School. I was a judge for 19 years. And right after I became a lawyer and passed the bar exam, I was stopped by police. They were white officers, and I was ordered out of the car. I was with my then husband, African American, and another male who was African American. We were put up against a wall at a major intersection against a store. It was thoroughly embarrassing. I had to, spread my arms, legs. Guns were pointed at us, and eventually we were allowed to turn around and put our hands down, but not after being threatened with being shot in the head if we ever said anything, as they were conducting apparently a search of our car. Well, it turned out that there had been a robbery of a store, and the identification was 3 black males on foot. We were 2 black males and a black female in a car. And I really thought that was going to be it for me. I was terrified. So I've had my own experience, which I think helped give me some insight when I sat on the bench for nearly 20 years, hearing cases where people were involved in these kinds of incidents.
Martinez, I'm going to show our audience people rallying for your sister. It says here on my laptop, justice for Rekia Boyd. I hope nobody has to see any rally for their own relatives who have passed away. Rekia died in 2012 under really terrible circumstances. First of all, as a sister, what was she like? What do you miss most about her?
I miss her smile. Whenever she walked in the room, she came in with, "Hey, y'all," or "Hey, everybody," and she always left with, "Love y'all," and
Nice.
She was a jokester. She loved to tell jokes, and if the room was quiet, she was gonna make it live. I just miss everything about her, the phone calls, the coming up to my room, the 30-minute to an hour talks that we had. I miss all of that. It was like she was becoming my best friend because I always treated her like she was my daughter. I was so tough on her because the streets are mean. I grew up in a mean street, so I just wanted to protect her. And then as we got older, she became more of a best friend. And we talked about everything. We started traveling different places, and I miss that. So when I have my quiet moments, it's like she's really in my head then.
Sure. See, I'm used to living in America as a black person. I'm used to hearing black men saying, there's certain things I will tell my son, certain things I will tell young black men. Would you ever have thought that you would have to have told Rekia, how do you live to make sure that nothing terrible happens to you via the police?
I talked to Rekia like she was my son, or like that, because it's like I had to give her the harsh reality of the world we living in, you know? So we sat down and we had little conversations about the police. We had conversations about the streets.
What did you tell her? What did you tell her?
I told her you have to be careful out here. You know, they'll plant anything on you and they'll do anything to you. I got put on my first card when I was 8 years old. I didn't know what was going on. I just seen everybody else around the neighborhood getting done that way. So I had to teach her, like, be careful of the police. Not all of them bad, but hey, if you know about the bad ones, then that makes you bad as well.
But even with that talk, even with you looking out for her, you couldn't keep her safe. What happened to Rekia?
You want to know the story of what happened to her?
Yeah.
Well, Rekia was hanging out in Chicago, Illinois, on the west side of Chicago at Douglas Park. It was about a crowd of 80 to 100 people outside, 75 degrees in March, which is unusual for Chicago, so everybody's outside in shorts. Rekia, her friend Ika Beeman, and two gentlemen started walking to the store. Well, on their way to the store, they got stopped by a black Mercedes-Benz, which we found out later was the officer who killed her, Dante Servin. So he had words with two of the guys that was in a group with Rekia, and he turned out the alley. As he turned out the alley, he stopped, and Antonio Cross, which was one of the guys in her group, he said, "What do your crackhead ass want? I told you we don't have no drugs." By the time he finished the sentence, they seen an arm extend from the Mercedes-Benz, and about 5 shots let off. Not only that, the officer got out of his vehicle and continued shooting. As a result of that, Antonio Cross got shot in his thumb, and my sister, Rekia Boyd, got shot in the back of her head. The hospital was a mere 4 blocks away, and she laid in that alley for 30 minutes while she was still breathing, heart still pumping strong, and everything. Her friend crying over her, and the police told her to step away or you're getting arrested, which they end up taking her to the police station anyway. As a result of that, she didn't make it. The doctors told us she's not gonna make it past midnight the next day, on March 22nd of 2012. And before 10 o'clock p.m. hit that night, all her brain activity just went down, and Rekia is no longer with us anymore as a result.
Our condolences to you, Martinez, and I know that story must be really hard to have to reshare, but it is important for our audience to hear the stories of what happens to women like Rekia. And that's why we asked our community specifically how racial and gender stereotypes are impacting the way that African American women are treated by U.S. police here. We got an answer that led into a discussion about race versus gender. I want you to take a look here. This is Miss African Roots, and she says, "It doesn't matter what we are. The fact that we are black means the police can criminalize us for any excuse they choose." And Kimberly, that comment really is something that another person picked up on in a video comment. This is Ronald Day, who does organizing on this. I want you to have a listen to what he had to say.
For us, the issue is not a matter of what can black women do necessarily in encounters with the police, but how can police better treat black women in these encounters? Police are the professionals, they're the ones that are trained, and they have the power to de-escalate these situations. And from our experience, it hasn't been an issue of gender, it has been an issue of race. And so we have been advocating for better training for the police so that these situations do not escalate when a person is not completely deferential to police.
So Kimberly, he says in his experience, but take us through that race versus gender divide.
Yeah, and it's an unfortunate and unnecessary divide. Look, what happened to Sandra Bland, I believe, many others believe, happened to her both because of her race and her gender. Black women throughout history in the United States have been subject to all sorts of aggression and other kinds of treatment that is meted out to them because they're women who are not white. So their blackness and their womanness contributes to them being read as being wanton, being abusive, being aggressive, as the DA said, being uncooperative. Let's think about it. Exactly how was Sandra Bland being uncooperative? The police officer asked her if she had a problem, and she responded quite directly and clearly that she did have a problem with the stop. But she said, but you go ahead and do your job. Basically, let's get this over with. What was cooperative was her refusal to accept this treatment with a smile. What made her non-normative is that she was a Black woman who was willing to speak about how she was feeling and denounce the situation as one being unfair. The fact that the response was immediately disciplinary, immediately coercive, immediately.
Do you think that killed her? Do you think if she said, yes, officer, here's my cigarette, officer, I'm so sorry, officer, do you think we wouldn't even be doing this program today?
I think we wouldn't be doing the program, potentially. You know, one never knows what else would have happened because the police officer, that wasn't the first time he asked her if she had a problem. Look, the encounter for constitutional purposes was over when he walked back to the car. There really was no need to have a what's your problem conversation at all. So my sense is that whatever Bland said, if it had been
Kimberly,
along the lines of...
this is a much bigger conversation than trying to work out one woman's tragic story. This is a much broader conversation. Let me show you, this is what Sandy Bland was making her own videos about racism. Let me show you a little clip of one of her videos. They're called Sandy Speaks. Have a look at this.
Good morning, my beautiful kings and queens. Yes, Black people know that all lives matter. But what I need you guys to understand is that being a Black person in America is very, very hard. This thing that I'm holding in my hand, this telephone, this camera, it is quite powerful. Social media is powerful. We can do something with this. If we want to change, we can really, truly make it happen. Go out there and be the greatest thing that you can, and I guarantee you it will turn your life around. Sandy Speaks.
Judge Cordell, this is a young woman who actually totally understands the society that we live in right now, the impact of racism, and she's now dead, potentially because of that very society. If we try to look at, okay, not just share the stories, that's not enough. If you're trying to look at what do you do with law enforcement, as a former judge, where would you start?
Sure. Well, first of all, we wouldn't even know Sandra Bland's name if it weren't for the dash cam. So, and if these officers, that officer had been wearing a body camera, we would have seen everything that happened off screen, because there was a lot of commotion when she was taken down to the ground and forced down, and as she claimed, her head was smashed against the ground. So it's really important that the tape we heard about talking about police training, all police officers go through police academies all throughout the country. Most people, the general public, we have no idea really what that training is. We don't know how much of it deals with bias training, about anti-discrimination. We don't know. But some of the things, so that's one thing. I think there should be more transparency about what's being taught police officers. But two things that should be done. One is that they should be wearing body-worn cameras. They should turn them on the minute they have an interaction with anyone and turn it off when they're back in their cars. That's the first thing. And there should be a protocol for how the camera should be operated.
Judge, if you've got a very bad-tempered police officer, I'm just going to say that police officer that we saw there, he was not in a good mood. Why would he turn his body camera on?
Well, that's just it. If they're under an order from the police chief to turn on the cameras, they have to turn them on. And some cameras, the technology is such that they automatically come on as soon as an officer steps out of his or her car. So the technology has really advanced with these. So it's really critical. And you know what? Cameras tend to make officers behave better and the people with whom they're interacting behave better. But I want to say about Sandra Bland is that she behaved. She did not commit any violation of the law. to have a bad attitude, which is how I guess the officer perceived it, and who wouldn't have a bad attitude getting pulled over by a police officer, to have a bad attitude is not a crime. She committed no crime. And indeed, as Kimberly pointed out, once that officer decided, you know, I'm either going to give you a warning or a ticket, he had no legal authority to order her out of that car, none whatsoever. And that's when everything went downhill.
Right.
It's interesting.
And I just want to say, with respect to the body cameras, so I also agree that we wouldn't be talking about this were it not for the body camera or for the dash cam. So it really is important to capture this. But also, let's recognize that with respect to this case, Eric Garner, and any number of others, what commences after you have a video is a huge public debate about whether the officer did anything wrong. And it's shocking to see how many people are willing to say that if she hadn't said that, she would still be alive, so therefore it's her fault.
I know, I didn't say, Kimberly, it's not her fault, but I'd rather that she were alive than rather than dead.
I'm not saying that you are saying, I'm saying that this is actually
bring that up,
a theme that many people are saying. And we've got to be able to focus on the fact you can say anything you want to a police officer. That's never a justification for that kind of coercion. And many Americans think it is. That's where our battle is right now.
And let me just say, Eric Garner, you may remember, is the gentleman who was killed in a chokehold, and he studied the phrase, I can't breathe, because he couldn't breathe as he was being choked and apprehended by the police. Malika.
Right. Well, picking up on a point made a little bit earlier, this is Marwan on Facebook, and he talks about what should be done, where we go from here. Marwan says, I think each policeman before graduation should complete 200 hours of community service within minority communities. But on Twitter, that gets pushed back. This is Sharon, who says, sensitivity training is null and void when you're raised to hate and a badge gives you an unrealistic sense of power. And of course, Martinez, we know that is not, that does not speak for all police officers on the force, but you've become an activist now after the death of your sister. What do you want to see happen?
Oh, the police from where I'm from Chicago, they're not involved in the communities. The only thing they do is sit outside of the communities and wait for crimes to happen. If they was more involved, then maybe a lot of this would be curbed. Maybe the trust from the community will be instilled into these officers once again. But they're not doing nothing but about to cause a major uprising. And then by the time it's too late, they're gonna wanna sit down and talk at the table. But then it's not gonna be any talking. It's not gonna be any talking anymore. I mean, because who's going to want to listen at that time?
But see, what Martinez is talking about is really another name for it is community policing. So that is part of the solution. And community policing means officers get out of your cars all day. All day, you're walking in communities, you're getting to know people, you know who lives there. People are more willing to come forward with information about crimes. But what police officers do today, they stay in their patrol cars, they ride around, just like Martinez says, until they have a sense they need to get out because they sense that there's maybe a crime has been committed. That's the wrong way to go about it. Policing started off with community policing in this country. The officers were known by first names, and they also knew the first names of people who were in the community in which they policed. Now we've gone to militarization, tanks, bulletproof vests, big helmets, these nighttime goggles, and it has further distanced police from community. We need to do, as Martinez is saying, we need to get officers out of their cars all day, on their feet, which means they need to be in shape. And by the way, for those who may not know it, there is no requirement in most police departments that once they finish the academy, that they have to stay in shape.
Judge.
So that means they're less likely to run after somebody, right? They're more
Judge?
likely to use weapons. Yes.
I want to end on the conversation that we started with here via my laptop. These are all women who died as they had an interaction with the police. These women are very, very important. If you could tell us one line, Kimberly, why these women are so important, how would you end this show with a single line? Kimberly Crenshaw.
Because if Black lives matter, women's lives have to matter.
Kimberly Crenshaw, Martinez Sutton, and Judge Cordell. I'm taking you to the post show, stream.aljazeera.com. Thanks for being part of this conversation. Thanks for watching. Hello again, this is the Streams Online Post Show. We're talking about US police abuses against African American women. I want to get right back to that conversation. Martinez, you spend time with people telling you their own personal stories, their own family tragedies. What do you do with that information? What do you do with those stories? How do you help them, can you?
Well, I just try to help spread them as far as I can, and I try to tell their stories to whomever I can, because that's like one of the major ways to spread it. Like the media don't like to talk about the positive and the things. They like something that's negative. So, and a lot of women that's murdered or killed out here in the streets, they haven't did anything negative. They don't have a lengthy police record or anything like that. So they're not talked about.
Right. If you could...
Well, and if I could add to that, because this actually builds off the last comment that we had about the need for police training and getting them out of the cars. I think for some kinds of police interaction that is helpful. But the other thing we have to remember looking at the cases of Black women, many of the Black women that we report on and say her name, report about Black women killed by the police, are women whose families called the police to help them. Tanisha Anderson, for example, is a Black woman who was having an emotional health crisis, was outside in the winter, and her family just wanted help to bring her in. The police came, cordoned her off from the family, surrounded her, tried to put her into a police cruiser to take her to a hospital. She didn't want to go. So they immediately turned this into a situation where coercive force was applied. They threw her down to the ground, and in the process of taking her down, they injured her, and she ultimately died. And even as she was dying, her family was not allowed to come and comfort her. This case is multiplied by many others. When the police are called, and they shouldn't necessarily be called for some of the things they're called for, like mental health, and then they get there, and all they see is a stereotype that then they want to constrain and actually coerce into conformity. That's when so many Black women's lives are at risk. We need to not use the police for many of the issues that they're not trained to deal with. That's when Black people lose their lives.
And Kimberly raises a really good issue, because police departments are supposed to have what's called crisis intervention training, and that is special training to deal with people who have mental illness or have emotional problems. And there are many departments that don't have it because it's not required. When they do have it, police officers are not required to take the training. So that indeed is part of the problem. There was an incident in California. A California highway patrolman saw a Black woman walking barefoot on the freeway. She was clearly mentally ill, and it was caught on camera by someone who happened to have a cell phone and had the courage to come forward, where this officer took her down and then repeatedly just punched her in the head. She was unarmed, barefoot, clearly mentally ill.
Kimberly, people online are pointing to something that you touched on a little bit earlier, but I want to delve into now. And this is this idea. This is Dandelion on Twitter. She says, oftentimes women of color are not allowed to challenge police, and that's the audacity of Sandra Bland. She says, another person, this is Kim, who says, racial profiling creates these racialized norms of gender, and so someone who doesn't conform is viewed as disorderly. And she went on to say that in most cases, particularly we're talking about women of color. So Kimberly, I'm interested in specific examples that you see the treatment of women by police and women of color by police, as opposed to the treatment that a man of color might get.
Yes, well, I think many of the cases that we talked about are women who are seen as being disorderly. One Black woman was simply walking across a parking lot. The police saw her, thought that they saw her swallowing drugs. They went and strangled her, trying to force her to give up the drugs, and they ended up killing her. We can't imagine police doing this to white women or other women where they would think there might be some cost to pay for treating a woman that way. Or Kendra James, who was simply a passenger in a car that had been pulled over for some minor traffic violation. She moved into the front seat. The police officer apparently took offense to that, tried to remove her. and within seconds ended up shooting her in the head. We could go on and on, but basically I think what we're looking at is the way that Black women in America over time have been seen not quite as women, but something less than that. So their motherhood, their love bonds with each other, all of these are clearly made irrelevant when the police encounter them. And actually they create stereotypes about Black women as being superhuman in the same way that they create those stereotypes about Black men.
Martinez.
And Kimberly, there's also that stereotype.
Hold tight for a moment, because Martinez is trying to jump in with two Black women in the conversation, two Black women hosts. Martinez is in the minority. Let me just give him a little space. Martinez, go ahead.
I know. I just wanted to mention Melissa Williams from Cleveland. I just came from the Black Lives Matter convening over the past weekend. And folks came and talked to me about Melissa Williams, and she was a young woman who got killed November 29th, 2012, where she was involved in a small chase where the police started following her and a male occupant, Timothy Russell, because they said they thought they heard shots coming from the vehicle. So after the chase, they got cornered in a school parking lot, and 137 shots were let off. 24 entered Melissa Williams and 23 of that of Timothy Russell. That right there is barely being talked about, but as of recent, I have started to see it being picked up even more.
Why do you think that is, Martinez? Why do you think that story now, more people are hearing about it? I'm hearing about it now for the first time as you're telling me.
Oh, because it's like the lives of Black women. I wouldn't say they are starting to matter, but they are starting to spread around. You know, we are pushing for support with like the Say Her Name movements and everything. It's like we're raising awareness all around the States, and not only the States, but around the globe. I mean, people over from London and Africa, they are saying her name. Over the past weekend in Cleveland, I had so many people from overseas, internationally, come up to me and said, I just want y'all to know that. And there was a conference in Cleveland, just to catch everybody up. There was a Black Lives Matter conference. So people were coming to you to talk about what? Talk about the different women lives that was killed. That was taken away from us. And that's because I walk around, instead of wearing brand names, I walk around just like the T-shirt I have on. It has women names that has been taken away from us, that's been taken off this earth due to senseless police violence. And just like one case I heard of Megan Hockaday. She's from Oxnard, California. She was killed in front of her 3 kids. Police was called to her house because of a domestic disturbance between her and her significant other. And as they arrived, they said that Megan tried to rush them with a knife in her hand, so they shot her dead in front of her 3 children.
20 seconds after they arrived. 20 seconds after they arrived on the scene, she was dead.
All right, Martinez, I'm feeling sick to my stomach, which is all of the stories that you're sharing with us. Let me just go back to the judge. Judge, what did you want to add just before we wrap up?
A couple of things. I had a question for Martinez, actually, when he was describing the shooting, and I think that's the case where the officer actually jumped up on the hood of the car and continued firing bullets and killed the 2. Yes. And my question is, was any of that caught on video? Yes,
they actually had a video circulating with the officer on the hood letting shots off into the vehicle. Some of the bullets hit Timothy Russell, some of them hit Melissa Williams. And the officers, I believe, were suspended or something like that.
He was acquitted. He was acquitted just a couple of months ago by a judge who said that his defense, namely he was afraid for his life, he was endangered because he believed that Melissa and her partner had guns, justified his jumping on the hood of the car. Now, I don't know about you. If I think somebody has a gun in the car, the last thing I'm going to do is go jump up on the hood of the car and make myself a bigger target. But that was acceptable, and he was acquitted.
All right. I really appreciate, Judge, that you gave us some very practical suggestions of where do we go from here. Martinez, for you, where do you go from here? All of these stories, these names that you have on your T-shirt, now what?
Well, I'm steady trying to make the Say Her Name movement even bigger. You know, we're steady going to recognize all the victims that have fallen victim to police brutality and to the violence on the streets. I want people to know that women are victims too. It's not just about our black man out here, but it's also about our black women that are not being named, not being recognized. I mean, they are our glue that helps keep us, you know, black men on our feet. I mean, if they take away our black women, it wouldn't be no more black men left.
Kimberly, you started this Say Her Name campaign. I'm wrapping up, Judge, so apologies for moving on. Kimberly, you started this campaign. There is a Say Her Name report. People are talking about this online, offline. Now what? What's next?
Well, one is we need to continue to build the awareness of how Black women are also vulnerable to police violence. We need to say her name. So in every protest, in every gathering in which we are advocating for Black lives, we need to make sure that we include all of the names of Black women that we've heard on this show and others that are in the report. So that's an important step. And then more broadly, we need to understand that this is both a problem of police not having any effective constraints. That's number one, and we need to focus on that. But we also need to focus on the fact that there are anti-Black stereotypes that still animate bad treatment that Black people experience, men, women, boys, and girls. So we have to have a broad movement to see how all of these are moments where the way in which Black people have been viewed ever since slavery is continuing to shape the treatment that they have now.
Kimberly Crenshaw, Martinez Sutton, and Judge Cordell, I really appreciate you being part of this program. I'm going to end with a comment from our online community. Malika.
I'll actually give you two for the price of one, because this is where we go from here. This is Josie, who says the brutal killings of Black people by police won't change until structural, systemic racism is addressed on high. But in the meantime, there's this comment via Facebook from Anne Marie, who says, never leave home without your camera recording. The camera should be fitted with a panic button that is fed to a central server to be broadcast by the internet and Black media in real time. So that's one suggestion there. And actually Amnesty International, Femi, has that app.
Excellent. Thank you very much, guests. Thank you to our online community. I'm going to leave you here on my laptop dedicating this show to these Black women. Thanks for watching.